Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm the editor-in-chief with the Knowledge Hook Signature Leadership Series, and thrilled to welcome you here. As you can see, we have three partner organizations that have come together to create the SEL Global Leadership Series. And those three partner organizations had a conversation last March and thought that at a time of a pandemic, education leaders really needed some support and came up with this concept of an SEL Global Leadership Series. So thrilled that we are continuing on, and I can just say that based on what's going on between elections and attacks and really challenging things happening around the world, the three partners are committed to continuing to offer this support. So we will be with you for the next long while. I want to introduce you to each of the different organizations. The first one is Karanga, and Karanga is an organization, a not-for-profit that came together about 18 months ago, and to focus on the concept of a global alliance for SEL and life skills. And we added life skills because depending on what part of the world you're from, these skills are referred to by different names, and life skills is what is referred to in a big part of the world. So they're doing really interesting work. We invite you to join us. I am an executive member on that group, and Giancarlo Brotto, who's our host today, is also a member of the steering committee. So please join us, all free resources, and happy to have you with us. Second organization is Salzburg Global Seminar. And Salzburg Global Seminar is a think tank that came to be after the Second World War in 1947. And there was a woman, her husband had died. They owned this property in Austria, and she got together with a couple of American leaders, and they decided to create this type of think tank, really with the idea of trying to make sure that coming out of the Second World War, the world would be in a better place. They look after, they talk about and have sessions on different topics, finance, healthcare, global citizenship, climate change, a variety of different sectors, and certainly education is one, and they've been a huge proponent of social emotional learning. It's got fellows from 180 countries around the world, so it's great to have those connections, and we invite you to take a look at that organization. The final partner is one that I'm doing work with, which is Knowledge Hook. They are a Canadian digital math company and doing really interesting work. And my background as a director of education in Ontario, in Ottawa, Canada, certainly connected me to the challenges of having teachers have the capacity to be doing really good math with their kids. And so that's what that company is all about. And they have asked me to create the Signature Leadership Series, and we focus on three different areas. The one is Education 2030. So what are the global trends happening in education? The second pillar is future skills, and we've got a great example of that today with having kind of what are the skills that business leaders are hoping to have in their employees when they're coming out of our education systems, either K-12 or post-secondary. And finally, taking a look at mathematics, kind of what are those overarching things that system leaders, department officials and ministry officials would really be trying to get right so that our kids come out of our school systems being numerate and ready for that world. So those are the three partner organizations. We're really happy to say that we've got some great participation today. We've got registrants from 6 Canadian provinces, 16 US states, and 17 countries. And it really goes to show you that these are conversations that we want to be happening together. We're going to have a different look this time than our typical sessions where we have presentations. Giancarlo has these amazing industry leaders, and they're going to have more of a fireside chat look at a session today. And so what we really would like is, please, for you that are on live today, put in your questions. You've got an opportunity. We've got 3 business champions that are doing some really interesting work in their workplaces. So don't hesitate to ask questions. Giancarlo and I will make sure that you get an opportunity to have those voiced. And just before I pass it over to Giancarlo, I just want to say Giancarlo is an incredible colleague of mine. He's been doing great work in not only in the province of Ontario, but worldwide. He is executive director with Catalyst. He's played a very prominent role at Smart Technologies, and he's doing great work globally. So Giancarlo, thanks a ton for being here, and over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and it's a pleasure to be part of this series. If those of you who are on the line and have been part of these before, you know that they're always right on point. They always deliver value, and we hope today is no different. Here in Ontario, we have this program called Take Your Kid to Work Day, which you take 14-year-olds and you send them with their parents to work, and it's actually happening this week. Today's session, we're taking you all to work, and that is the spirit of what we're going to be doing together. We have three incredible leaders who have led organizations and led people and created culture shifts. And what we want to do is give a window into their brains, really, and their experiences about what is happening in industry related to this topic of social emotional learning. We know all of you that have joined, this is something that's near and dear to you, right? Whether you're at a school system who is, already moved on the frontier, broadening the perspective of what is it that school should be intended to do? What are the outputs that we want our kids, what do we want them to know and to be able to do? And some of you are just starting that journey, and the rest of you are anywhere in between. And so we hope today this perspective gives you a lens into an important one, which is industry. And industry has been having this conversation for quite a long time, and they're doing things, and we want to expose that to you in today's session. And what I encourage you to do as we start off, you now know about us. You now know about this session. I want you guys to have a voice as well. And I see Paolo is the first one from Italia. Ciao Paolo. Speriamo che è bello in Italia. Qui fa freddo in Toronto. The rest of you, please say hello to each other. Let us know where you're from. Tom D'Amico, great seeing you. It's been a while from Ottawa. Wendy, hello from Nova Scotia in Canada. Josie from Toronto as well. So let us know where you're from and what you do. Get to know each other from the audience here. So, guys, we are here together with some great panelists. I'm going to take some time right off the bat to introduce them, to let you know kind of the world that they live in and where their backgrounds are and what they're currently doing. And then what I'll be doing is engaging them with some questions. And if you registered, you might have read the questions, and we'll be taking them through kind of a dialogue and a conversation around some of these themes that connecting the world of work and the K-12 education systems that all of you are very familiar with. And so we're going to start in no random order, but with Deborah. And Deborah is an HR professional over 20 years in both private and nonprofit sectors. She's held senior roles with Plan International Canada, Habitat for Humanity, and most recently was the Executive Vice President of People, Culture, and Inclusion with the Canadian Cancer Society, which is a very prominent, well-known organization, and some amazing, amazing work that's been done there. She currently runs her own organization. It's called Deetails HR Consulting. She works with others kind of to share the knowledge with other industries and businesses, and she has a special toolkit that she's created. And she's, she likes giving. So she's spending several years teaching HR and business courses at colleges throughout Ontario. And so we're delighted to have Deborah, your lens and your experience with us here today. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
And next up is Mr. Jeff Lowe, coming from Calgary. Now, Jeff is the Executive Vice President and the Chief Human Resource Officer and Chief Marketing Officer at Smart Technologies, which is a Canadian company. And he's responsible for the internal culture and engagement within the business, and has over 30 years experience working with different global brands such as IBM and TELUS, and as well, is really a well-known, recognized authority, as it relates to culture, corporate culture, employee engagement, won numerous awards, frequent speaking engagements, and published articles on the topic. And so he'll be sharing with us a bit about that lens, kind of what has happened over the years, and some of the things that they're doing within the organizations related to the topic of cultural development, but also on the focus of developing employee competency as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Christine Greco joining us as well, well-respected leader in the industry, and she knows how to build teams and lead companies into the future, and her background and experience speaks for itself. She's been a VP of HR HarperCollins Canada and Harlequin North America for the last 3 years. And she's been managing and leading the strategic direction of HR, including all aspects of talent management, total rewards, talent acquisition, learning and development, engagement programs, you name it. It's all about the people, the culture, and development. She's also worked for many, companies, well-known companies across the globe in the human resources department, such as Samsung. Some of you might know Tim Hortons, DuPont Canada, Molson, Coors, and General Electric Appliances. So lots of experience, depth of knowledge. We have an incredible panel and talent joining you today. And thank you all and welcome and thanks for joining. And maybe I'm going to start with like a question I think we're all dying to hear, because I think it's all of us are dealing with it in some way, but how are things going? What is happening in your roles today? And, thank you for carving out an hour, but maybe we could just go round table, just quickly saying hello to everybody and tell us quickly, what is your world like, in these last 6 months? I can't imagine, but how would you describe it from your lens? And we'll start with Christine. I see you first on my screen there.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks, Giancarlo. Busy, it's extremely busy. I think all of us do have Zoom or Teams fatigue. I have people that have been working in the workplace all through the pandemic. I have had people be 100% remote. And then you throw in social injustice, diversity and inclusion, mental health. It's been extremely busy. So, but you know what? Really important work.
Yeah, so. No doubt. And Deborah, what has it been like from your lens?
Absolutely draining, probably. So I did spend the last 6 months, unfortunately, due to COVID, actually downsizing the Canadian Cancer Society by 40%. And so there was an $80 million drop in revenue. We saw a loss of 350 staff, closing 50 offices. So it had been quite a long haul. But at the end of the day, I think what was paramount during that kind of transition was the underpinning of care for people, understanding that it's of no fault of their own and circumstances are circumstances, but treat people like people, not just employees. And I think that's one that is emotionally draining and exhausting, but absolutely satisfying at the same time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so true. And Jeff, what has it been like from your lens?
Yeah, very, very similar to what Christine and Deborah had to say. It's been change on top of change. There's a lot to deal with. The well-being of our team and our partners is of the paramount concern. But then there's also a lot going on as well, right? So at SMART, many of you will know SMART. We're the inventor of the original SMART board, and we've been in education for a long time. And education technology is actually booming right now, especially with regards to distance and remote learning, which is a business we're in. So on one hand, we've had to deal with COVID and remote working and how to support our team members. On the other hand, we're actually transitioning our business to be less from a formal classroom solution provider to a distance learning provider. As a result, we need to change the makeup of our company. So we've been reorging while we've been COVIDing, and all of that is just a massive amount of change for our team.
So I hear busy, I hear draining, I hear change, but this underpinning of it's about the focus of people, right? And all of that centers around how do we manage and work with the people that we have that makes the business what it is, right? And supporting them in the ways that they need to be supported. And that's potentially what I like to go to, and I think a lot of people are probably curious about to hear from you most. And you've all had positions at different companies and spent multiple times, multiple years in business. What would you say, are some of the skills in today's workforce that are paramount that you've noticed, or even that, maybe were important, but now they're really dialed up, and especially in a time of change and pandemic and uncertainty and transition, it's really cranked up. So give everybody a sense from your lens, what are the things, when you're hiring, as you're doing performance review, like what are the skills that you guys have come to know and understand, take top priority, or have seen even more importance? And maybe Jeff, we'll start with you first.
Sure. I think the number one that comes to mind right now, and it might be the same for my colleagues, is resiliency. That's a very topical, and it almost is a I would think it has to be on everybody's top 10 lists right now. And so certainly that's in there. I think some of the other ones that come to mind for me are certainly things like collaboration. Collaboration has never been more important, and collaboration takes on a different form when people aren't physically together. So collaborating over distances is a real skill. It fits in with emotional intelligence as well. So it's part of collaboration. And like, how do you read the room when there is no room? How do you show empathy to people and let them feel how they're feeling when you're again not with them? And how do you get a gauge for that? These are really tough skills, right? That are really important. If there's one though that I could mention, that it might not be a typical one, but something that we certainly look for and is really welcome. We've actually been hiring quite a few new employees lately as part of our reorg and our transition. And it's, I guess I classify it as confidence or having a point of view. And I think sometimes young people coming right out of school or young professionals are coming in and it's like, oh, I better be mindful and just walk a very straight line here and learn, which yeah, there's a certain amount of that. But there's actually a flip side of that which is you have a fresh perspective and you have an expertise that is really needed in business. And so come in with a little bit of bravado and come in with a point of view saying, I have a lot of passion for the way I think things should be done. That has really, really been welcomed on our team for people that come in and question things in, of course, a respectful manner. But it's tough because there can be some just things getting paralyzed by uncertainty. And it's really great for people to come in with confidence and say, that's okay, we got this. Here's the way to do this. Here's what I've been taught. Here's what I believe in. That might be the number one thing we're looking for.
So resiliency, collaboration, emotional intelligence, confidence, right? Brilliant. Deborah, what would be on your list? What have you noticed? What have you experienced? Your skills?
Resiliency, obviously, which I think is the key amongst my colleagues. Communication, fantastic communication skills. And I always have this saying, which people have written and heard before, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And I think that is paramount, given the diversity of thought and the way in which we are working today, globally across borders and surrounding. So I think for us, that's key. The interesting one, and I agree with Jeff around some bravado and some confidence. And for us, as I've seen, and I don't know whether it's unique to not-for-profit, so I throw that out there, but one of the ones that we look for is humility, which is one you don't often characterize in that way. And so someone who is humble enough to come in to know what they know, but acknowledge and state what they don't. And so coming out of, high school and trying to set yourself either into work or co-ops and so on and so forth, it is important to say, I'm not familiar with this space. I do have a set of skills. I don't know how they translate. And so being open and willing to learning. So those would be some of the keys.
Brilliant. Deborah, what would be on your top list?
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, a lot of what Deborah and Jeff have said, I think I would also add to the resilience, the ability to deal with ambiguity. No one has all the answers. And actually, we're all learning every day and pivoting and shifting very quickly. So nothing needs to be perfect as well. So it's okay to drive the car and change the tires at the same time right now. So we're all learning together, no matter how many years of experience you have or you don't have. And I would say, so part of that is being curious. And I think part of the confidence is when you onboard people all remotely, they do need to be a bit confident because they actually need to put themselves out there. So, and that's not whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, but that's how you're going to integrate, how you're going to build relationships and network in an organization. And it's a little more difficult when you're all sitting in very different places. So some of those are the additional things I would add to what's been said.
All beautiful comments, you know, and what I'm thinking here, I'm putting my K through university hat on. And those of you that are watching and in the chat, I want you to answer this question. If you're working with the school system is, you know, do you currently assess and give feedback to kids on these skills that you just heard? You know, how much of a priority, right? You could answer yes or no, or, oh, I wish. But, you know, I'm listening to what you're saying, right? Especially Deborah, the comment you made about the communication, right? And what you said is communication is about speaking, you know, eloquence and the words that they use. No, it's about listening, right? So do we understand what communication is? Right. And these are things that aren't just, you know, given to someone that someone says, oh, today I'm going to be a better communicator. I wasn't yesterday, but today I'm way better. This is something that's developed over time. And you have experiences that develop them. And so curiosity, and you can throw it in the chat, everyone, you know, in the current system that you're in, are these the things that, you know, are there conversation happening with your teachers and your students? Is there feedback being given to students about how well they're communicating and giving feedback towards, you know, how well, you know, if they're being resilient or the opportunities for that? And that's something that I think when we think about from a work perspective and a school perspective, how might we think about school as the place with which we start developing these skills and giving kids feedback as their progress towards developing these competencies with which all of you obviously no doubt say are important. Now, Jeff, I want to circle back to something that you said, which is around, you know, now in this era of remote, and I think Christine, you mentioned it too, and Deborah even alluded to it as well, right? You know, in this remote era, you know, when you're hiring, you know, having to exude confidence on a video, on a little screen that you have, you know, is very different. Note, like, what have you guys have noticed? You know, how has there been a shift as employees are now working more remotely? You know, what kind of skills have kind of needed to be dialed up? You know, Jeff, you mentioned the one about collaboration. You know, are there others? I'm curious to hear your perspectives on what other skills have you noticed that you've had to like really pay attention to now that your workforce has been forced to go remote in some cases. So Jeff, over to you.
Well, I think some of the things that we're doing and seeing right now are good examples of that. So having the courage to turn on your video and show active listening, and to put things in chat windows and use the thumbs up button on certain types of technologies, and just to show that you're present and actively listening and engaged, even if you're not presenting. For some folks, that's a tougher thing to do. For people who are more introverted, but that's one thing I think is really we've all seen a rise in, is using some of the technology and being mindful of the fact that I'm going to use some of these, and I'm going to do things like turn on my video, maybe not all the time, but I'm gonna put things in the chat window, and I'm gonna support other points that I like, whether I speak up or whether I give it a thumbs up or a like or what have you.
Great, yeah, new kind of skills and behaviors needed, even just new etiquette, right? And that's needed. Sure. Kind of the remote working. Deborah, what have you noticed?
So very similar, and I think the word I would probably use is adaptability. And so as people are now working remote and in their homes, it's almost like there's blurred lines between work and one's personal life. So maybe my colleagues will agree, but how many times have you seen a dog, a cat, a child, children pop up in the background? I think where before that was frowned at, it is actually embraced. And I think what that gets you is a lot of respect for people as individuals and contributors in an organization. And I think the way that we define contribution has shifted in the remote world. And I think that we have understood the value of what I call connectedness. And so you no longer have the opportunity to chat around the water cooler or do certain things. And so you have to create spaces or rooms or Zoom rooms or whatever it is to find ways to actually get to know one another offside of business. Those are some of the things that I've seen, at least the Canadian Cancer Society, try to push through to continue to refine their culture as we've been shifting.
Brilliant. Christine, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. I agree with Deborah. I think there's an authentic thing that's starting to happen. People are seeing CEOs with messy hair and their children in the background or whatever, and it makes everyone very real. When we all went out in March, we literally left on a Friday in chaos and didn't go back because we're in a downtown building in Toronto. We had just launched the week before basically Facebook at work. And so we have leveraged that immensely. So we have the electronic water cooler. We have, we've seen everybody's home office. We've seen everyone's Halloween pictures, like you name it. We, as executives, we do videos like weekly. So in some ways, it's not only employees, but leaders who've really had to step up and put themselves out there and do things differently. And that also creates the atmosphere for that courage and that confidence for new people. When they see this, they just want to be part of this, and they can feel comfortable starting to raise their hands and use chat and put themselves out there.
Speaking of chat, I think there's a lot of interesting comments and insightful comments in the chat already. One of the ones that John, like what John said about resiliency versus self-confidence can be at odds with each other. I really think that's interesting. I think that's true, because on one hand, resiliency, a lot of it is I gotta roll with the punches. Things are going to change. Change is okay, right? Change is going to happen, and I'm gonna roll with that. Confidence, I'm going to be out on my front foot. I'm gonna have that point of view. We're gonna go get things done. Are those two things different, or can they coexist? Right. That's a really interesting thought, I think.
I thought you were going to go to the virtual happy hours, yeah,
well, we're going to have that too, right?
building the team and getting to know, and it's the human side. I think, Deborah, you mentioned in the beginning, it's the care for people, and it's the human side of things, right? And the messy hair of the CEO, Christine, I love it, right? It's humanizing it. And so, as we think about, so we talked about, skills that are, you guys noticed, right, in industry that they're looking for, they're hiring for, that they want to see in employees. We talked about, hey, new skills we've got to dial up now, and when there's change and there's transition. How do you help your employees develop them, right? So I just mentioned, school systems are now thinking, and in the chat there was mention to some school systems where the curriculums are now integrating this as part of their curriculums. I know, was it Maria mentioned in the province she's in, that they're doing that, as industry, as your business, that there's certain skills that are important. We know the statistics on, having to rehire versus having to develop capacity in someone. There's gains there, and so I'd love for you to share with everyone, within the organizations that you currently work in or that you've worked in, how do the employers help employees develop these social and emotional skills in the workplace? What kind of things are happening in your organizations that help develop these skills? So Christine, we'll have you lead.
Sure. So being in HR for too many years to tell you, I think this comes down to what I would call the what and the how. So, the what is easy. It's the deliverables, that you expect of an employee. The how is actually how they get the job done. And so if you follow a what and how model, it's really about, it's ongoing coaching, it's ongoing feedback. It is in the performance system and process. It's in the development process. So, the development plan isn't, I need to learn Zoom meeting better. The development plan is, I probably need to improve my listening skills, or I need to, continue to adapt, right, and show my ability to pivot faster, whatever that is. It's a dialogue around those things that are the how, those things that are the more, some people would used to call them soft skills. They're actually really important skills. Whether it's, you want to refer to them as emotional intelligence or EQ or whatever it is, and it's integrated in all aspects of kind of what we do with people in workplaces. So, and I would just add to that, the fundamental foundation of that is, what are your values and norms that you're trying to put into place as your culture, because that will then define what the how really is and what it needs to be for your employees, your customers, and all your stakeholders.
And can I just add to that? So I love what Christine said about the what and the how. And then I just add in one other, and you touched on it in terms of values, is the why. So I think more and more we're looking inwardly to say, why are we here? The what we can train for, the how you've absolutely got it right, but the why And I think that the more that we can figure that out for ourselves, certainly as we're younger, it helps us decide what kinds of careers and organizations we choose. It can also lead to how invested and motivated we are. And I think it's an interesting personal journey, and it is an aha that I've seen as the organization that I was at, the Cancer Society, was maneuvering through the minutia and trying to deal with a circumstance that they couldn't control. And so people went into their why, and that gave them an anchor for holding strong and persevering in tough times. So I would add that one.
Yeah, I mean, both of those comments that really resonate with me as well in terms of the how, the what, and the why. We've done a lot of work at SMART on something we call shared purpose. What's the why of the company, and then what's the why of the team member, and how do they coexist, and how do people see themselves in terms of why am I doing what I'm doing, and how does that support what the company states it's doing? And so to do that, of course, the organization has to be very invested in the why as well, which is tough in a lot of organizations. The other thing Christine was talking about values, and values lead in very strongly, I think, to this topic, to social and emotional skills. One of the things that we've done at SMART is we've taken our values, and I think, like most companies, we have our stated values. We have 6 of them. We've had them ever since I've been in the company for 9 years. But what we've done recently with those is actually codify them to say, what do those actually mean? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. For example, you can say one of our values is connectedness. Deborah was talking about connectedness earlier. That's actually one of our stated values, has been for years. Accountability, customer centricity. But it's not enough just to put those on a poster and put them behind the reception. It's like, what does that actually mean to help our team members? And so we've actually, through involving our whole company and through workshops and a lot of rigor and working with some outside consultants, we've actually codified, here's the behaviors that give you examples of what these values actually mean. And then these are things that we use for recruiting, for onboarding, for actually, this is how we rate our team members, not just on your, did you meet your objectives? Did you do the job? How well are you modeling these behaviors? We use them for recognition. So it's a huge part of our culture, is we've codified the behaviors. There's a saying that values matter, behaviors matter more. And a lot of the behavior, they go directly to social emotional skills and EI and all the things we're talking about.
Giancarlo, I can't resist jumping in, even though I'm not supposed to. I'm still listening because this is so interesting. And what I love about what you guys are saying is that many of the people that are in the audience right now and that will be listening to this on demand, in schools, we spend so much time talking about building a culture. How do we build a culture so that kids feel connected and that the staff feels connected? And we know when we walk in schools like that, you can taste it as you're walking in the door. And it's really helpful for us to be able to be hearing that you're doing the same thing in the workplace. So the time and investment that we take with the kids to do that and with our staff to do that, it's not just helpful for their learning experience while they're in K-12. We also know, based on what you're saying, that that's the kind of environment they're moving into in most workplaces as well. And you talked about the idea of codifying behaviors. In the education system, we call those look-fors. So we'll say, if this is if this is the social emotional skill that we're trying to focus on, what would the look-for be for that? What would that look like? What would that sound like? What would that, what would you be seeing? So yeah, sorry, Jean-Claude. Yeah. I couldn't resist jumping in. It's so good.
It's funny because I was actually going to call on you because there's some commentary in the chat. I know Tom mentioned, they're focusing on competencies, and then Lisa was talking about how, well, wait a minute, we're doing this for our students, right? Earlier we were talking about this is important. Let's prioritize this for our students, and people shared ideas and programs that they're doing to develop these skills in kids. What about the staff that have to develop these skills in the kids, right? And so I'm going to start with you, actually, Jen, and then I'll go to the panelists and ask the same question. But when you're, you used to be the director of education of Ottawa, right? And when you think about, develop, some of our staff might need themselves some development and understanding in some of these competencies before they could even create programming and help these students develop these skills. So tell us a bit, what was your approach with how you helped your staff understand kind of in the same concept, right? It starts with the values and the norms, and then it's the behaviors that we have to exemplify and that you want your teachers to model and to lead. Tell us a bit about how that looked like for you kind of in your time as the director.
I'll be really brief because I don't want to take away from time with our incredible business leaders, but you know, absolutely. What was really interesting when we started moving down the pathway we went out with a big consultation in our board to talk about exit outcomes. You know, what are the skills and characteristics that the community, that the parents, the students, that the staff, that the business leaders said, these are the things that we think are really important. And, you know, we developed it. It came up with 5 characteristics and 5 skills. What was really interesting is that the teachers and the principals came back to us and said, you know what, we need help with this. We want to be developing those skills and characteristics as well as adults. And the good news is that that's completely aligned with brain development, et cetera, that says that social emotional skills continue to develop well into adulthood. So I think it's really hopeful for in the school setting, but I also think it's really helpful for business leaders. And what I love about what Jeff and Debbie and Christine are saying is they're talking about how their organizations are investing in the development of those skills. So yeah, really helpful. I'll let you get back to our guests.
And the reason why that's important to see it from the school lens is now I'm going to ask the same question to you guys, right? And I think some of you alluded to it, but you know, when you're looking at, you know, and Jen mentioned, you know, some teachers ask for it. Hey, I want that development, but I'm sure that's not the case, right? And so what are some of the mechanisms or programs that you put into place that kind of encourages it? Because kind of the main success of a business is around executing on those behaviors that are centered around those values and those beliefs. And so it's important that kind of, it's not just about like Jeff mentioned, poster that behind the water cooler reception, but that it's lived and that it's actualized and it's visualized. And so what are some of the mechanisms? And I think everybody who's listening, pay close attention to some of these strategies that industry uses that we might adopt into to our education systems. But can you share some of the programs or mechanisms you put in place for people development and for, you know, I would say those who might not, need some help in seeing the value and importance of personal development, personal growth, and what are some of the strategies that you guys leverage and utilize within your organization? So whoever wants to start first can jump in. Oh, that always happens and everybody goes quiet. Jeff, you go first. There you go.
Well, if you want, Giancarlo, without going too much into this, I actually put an example of what we call our behavioral framework in the slide deck. I don't know if Harris wants to bring it up or not. If not, that's fine. I can talk to it. But it's what I was talking about before, how we codified things. But let me tell you how this. Okay, good. Here it is. So this is the result of consolidating. So basically, the big bold words, those are our values. We've had those forever. What's new is the hexagons. The hexagons around. So when we say we're connected, what does that even mean, right? And so if you look at under connected, talk, especially when the stakes are high. That means don't always rely on email or shoot something across. What does it mean to be courageous? Respectfully speak your mind. Say what you think, even if it's controversial. So you go all the way around the loop here, and we spent a ton of time, and we had our whole company involved actually in coming up with this in terms of values matter, behaviors matter more. And as you look through these, they're kind of hard to read, but most of them are around social emotional skills. So what do we do? I've already said we recruit from this. So I would say when we're doing a job interview recruiting exercise, at least half of it is being rated on people's abilities to model or get to these sorts of behaviors. Our performance evaluations are equally 50-50. How did you do against your job? Did you meet your sales targets? Are you modeling the behaviors that are part of our culture? And if not, then how can we help get there, right? So we have a whole program within our HR team that says, how do you get better at these if you're showing deficiency? These are a core part of we do an annual engagement survey, and we get a rating from 1 to 19. There's 19 behaviors on here. Which are we as an organization following the best? Which do we need to work on? And then we have teams do programs all over the world to say we got to get better at these certain sort of behaviors. And then last but not least is we have recognition programs around this. So every quarter we give out awards beautiful statues, some personalized gifts. Why? What are the awards called? They're called excellence awards, and it's excellence in the values. And the criteria, it's self-rated, is I would like to recognize this person for their demonstration of being accountable. And this particular behavior, when they did this, that's what it looked like, and they're getting this award. So this is all throughout our organization. It's a really, really important concept, not just a document, in terms of how important SEL is at SMART.
Brilliant. All of you are nodding your heads. Yeah. So give me the examples. What other examples do we have?
So I guess our journey is the same as Jeff's. We have ours are called guiding behaviors, and they're literally behaviors underneath sort of 5 key areas that are really important to us. They were developed actually by the employees and then shared up. We actually did it that way. That work was done about 4 years ago. They are integrated into our performance processes. We actually added a specific competency this year, kind of encapsulating them with an upgrade we did in our performance processes. I think, the biggest thing is, we provide a lot of training, a lot of education, a lot of coaching. In managers, we've invested a lot in managers to ensure that the right conversations are happening, because feedback is really important. And we don't wait for an annual performance appraisal. It's live, it's regular, it's two-way. So we've been very much on that journey to be able to have those conversations a lot more frequently around the right behaviors in the workplace. Absolutely, as part of the hiring process and onboarding process, I would say that, you're always going to have people that don't totally want to develop. And you can't force that. But, as people see rewards, recognition, promotions around them, they start, eventually they start to put 2 and 2 together of where their gaps are. And so, that, and we have very similar programs. We call it Cheers for our guiding behaviors. We've done that for a long time. So the more that you can point to the success, the more people eventually want to join you and be part of it, is what we found.
And I would say, again, it's very similar to what Jeff and Christine have. We call them guiding principles, so very similar to guiding behaviors. I think what was so interesting and unique about that is, I call it for the base, by the base, meaning that it was crafted by the employees. Through a series of conversations that they did not know they were having for an intention or purpose. I did that for over a year, and then basically pulled out together the nuggets of the language that they were using, regardless of where they were, what level, diversity, etc., and came up with those behaviors and then key phrases. That was shared with them so that they would agree, because it has to come from them. They can't be words on paper, I think, as Jeff had said. And that was bought in, which was great, because it was something they stood for, because it's what they said and know to be true, versus something that's pushed down. And then I think the other thing that my colleagues have also said is that there needs to be a linkage. There needs to be integration of those concepts within each work practice. We talked a lot about performance. It also is really important in promotion. And I think promotion, that the how and the why can be really subtle, but that helps define leadership. And a lot of times people follow based on how someone leads. It's not what they do and where they get their grooming from. So I think all of this at the end of the day is all about integration, so that when we talk about the social and emotional behaviors, they're seamless and we just do them, not because we have to check a box, but they just become so natural, part of regular life and regular business.
And there's a common thread to what all of you are sharing, and it's so interesting, right? Which is around how you went about generating these, right? And it's about, it's about the language, the behaviors. It's the real life kind of stories and language and actions that you see from the group that you're actually wanting to actually leverage and execute it. So those of you, on this call, take note of that. I think that is a common thread that connects all of it.
Giancarlo, can I mention one more thing? And I'm interested in if my panelists are seeing the same thing, or people who are listening in, is assessments, personality and EI assessments, right? So not just at Smart, but in other companies I've been in, I bet I've taken 10 assessments, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Insights or DISC, but they're super valuable. And it doesn't matter what actually your job or your profession is, it's what makes you tick. How do you relate to people? How do people relate to you? How do you get some self-awareness of actually how you're coming across? And so my suspicion is I haven't seen too much of this happening in schools. And why is that? Like, are people pausing to get a glimpse of an assessment of how I come across and what my personality is? Am I green or yellow? Am I, MBTI or what have you, right? So, because these things, we put a paramount on this at Smart, and I'm in other companies I've worked in as well. And then we share with groups, so it helps you relate to others too when you know what their profile is. So there's another thing that I think is really important, and I haven't seen that happen very much, although I'm sure it does happen in high school, for example. But I'd like to see more of that personally.
Yeah. I, as a parent, I have seen it with my kids, interestingly enough, at the high school level. I'm not sure they totally understood Myers-Briggs, and it was completely explained to them after, but I've seen it there, Jeff. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think the more that employees understand themselves, their motivations, their drives, the way they learn, and the more that that's used with their manager, you can, it bridges a lot of, and it demystifies a lot of things faster.
It does,
yeah.
And I will totally agree with that. So the Canadian Cancer Society started to use Myers-Briggs, and to really, again, look at it around personality and what we bring to the table and how it impacts others. I think that's critical. I think if you talk to people, a lot of people will say they're self-aware, but are they really? And what does that really mean? And so if you can harness that, your own self-awareness, then self-management is all that much more important. And especially with high school students that are trying to move up and try to figure out where they're going to land or what their choices are, there are some real nice opportunity in terms of milestones and experiences that they will go through that shift and shape that behavior. I agree with you, Jeff and Christine. I think to see more of that in schools is really good.
Okay, which is a beautiful segue as we start blending this world of the world of work and the world of school. And I was scanning through the chat here, and a lot of the comments that you mentioned, Rohit was actually asking that question very similar to that about, like, how do you go about assessing or giving people this feedback or this insight, and commentaries around people have taken these, personally have taken them, but they haven't done it kind of in a formalized ways in schools. And in other places, there's some countries around the world where it is, they do standardized assessments now, right? OECD is doing an international assessment of student social emotional skills, right? All of, several countries, 12 countries are participating in it. And now there's a heightened priority about how do we give kids feedback, like real kind of insight into who they are and how they interact with others, so that it becomes a conversation, right? That it's not just this thing, a piece of paper that you have, but it's a conversation throughout their learning journey and their work journey, right? It continues on into it. And so that's where I'd like to take kind of the remaining minutes that we have, right? Is, we have with us here a variety of different leaders from across the world, over 17 different countries represented. What kind of advice would you give to them, or what kind of insight would you share with them in terms of how, those obviously that are on the call are interested in, within their own context, doing a better job of raising the volume of developing social and emotional skills in these students so that they become the type of employees that you want to hire, and that not just hire, but stay with you, right? There's so many statistics that you see. Who was it? Actually, it was actually the Canadian government participating in the OECD study where they asked, why are you participating? And they said, well, our employers are telling us we have some great students coming out of, universities, and we're hiring these talented students. But then we let them go 2 or 3 years later, right? And how do we make sure that we sustain, these students, and that they have the skills and the capabilities that industry needs to sustain? And so, I'd love for you to kind of candidly share with everyone, what can school systems do? What would be your advice for school systems as they're thinking about and planning, dialing up this concept of developing social and emotional skills? And also, as you mentioned before, making it a thing about the school, developing capacity in their staff. There was someone who made a comment about how do we get our leaders on board, to make sure, and I'm sure you've had this challenge too, if you started from the ground up, how to get your senior executives and your directors and making sure that they're modeling and exemplifying the behaviors. So, if we can consolidate all of that insight and we can share it, what advice you would give to school systems? I know, Jeff, you mentioned, about how are we kind of having kids even have the conversation and doing some of these assessments? What other kind of things come to mind as you have a captive audience in front of you right now? And Deborah, maybe we'll start with you to lead the conversation.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, again, whether it's school or any organization, you have to be true and create the space. And we can't assume that it's there, because it isn't always. So the first is to create the space to be open and willing to have what I call diversity of thought. And to know that it's okay. And so people should have that permission and give themselves permission as students to be able to say what they need to say, understanding that there's context and consequences, but there's some nuggets in there about having that ability or the permission to be able to speak. And I think to do that really helps open up a conversation. And I think that's really what we want to create, is dialogue. It's not just one way. It has to be people having conversation that elevates a moment or a thought. I think that would be one. And organizations, we do that by creating different subcommittees or groups and giving different people exposure. It's not what you know, it's your ability to be able to contribute, and creating that space allows you to do that. I think that that's one of the examples I might give for schools, and I'll let my colleagues add on to that.
Christine, your thoughts?
Yeah, this one's a little harder for me. But, here's what I would say. I think Deborah's right. It's around the dialogue and the communication. And I don't know how that exactly always works between workplaces, industry, educators, and students. But with the digital world in front of us, I think there's ways of kind of starting to capture that and use it more quickly maybe than in the past. And I really do think, as someone who hires people, someone who's spoken at universities and colleges, the sooner that you can get students kind of engaged and somehow, work integrated learning, the better that is. And I don't know all the shapes of that. I'm not an educator by any stretch, but I think there's a wonderful opportunity around that. So, and I would just say one other thing, because I'm going to plug my industry just slightly. There has been an immense focus on STEM programs, and I came out of technology and I'm a big fan of them, but I also am now a bigger fan of STEAM. So adding in the arts and adding in that multidisciplinary thinking, because that's actually where you see a lot of the emotional intelligence stuff rise to the top. So I'll pass it to Jeff.
I'm glad you put it in there. Yeah, and the education industry is responding to that. Yeah, there has
absolutely. Absolutely.
Jeff, your perspective.
And my wife, who's a language arts and social teacher, thanks you for that, Christine. So I think this is the tough question, right? Because it's like, how do we do this? And it sounds almost too simplistic as, well, we have to meet. We have to open up a dialogue between education and business and talk about this very important topic. The key question is then, like, how does that work and where and so forth. I have one sort of similar example. It's not related directly to this topic, but it is around education and business. Something that happened in Calgary is there's a local business association, got a bunch of business leaders together in the city and met with the University of Calgary. And it was a really, really fascinating meeting. The topic was, are we teaching students the right things for business? But it was literally like, is the curriculum right for finance versus marketing versus human resources. But it was a really rich discussion, facilitated kind of like this with groups presenting to each other. And I think everybody got a ton out of it. What if we did a lot more of that, but focused on SEL? Mm. But I think the devil's in the details of how you organize that, and online, offline, what city, how do you get people involved? But that's what came to mind is, wow, it would be cool if we did that, but specifically for SEL.
So there you go, everyone. There's a tangible something that someone can take, an idea. If you're passionate about it, get it started, connect with your leaders. And I'm gonna, just highlight, there's a common theme to all of you mentioned, and Deborah, you started with this concept to create the space for it, right? Instigate that conversation, so people can actually start being active, not just talk about it, but actually be active in it, right? Christine, you mentioned this kind of, the experience. What is the experience that you're putting in front of them? Are these students that they can start participating? And then Jeff, it's this dialogue and the actual having the exchange between them both. So there you go, everyone. There's some practical examples. Hopefully we've given you a window into industry and how there's so many parallels with education. Because one does serve the other. And Jennifer and we acknowledge it. We thank you so much for hosting and having us here today. Hopefully what we've shared will have an impact with you leaders. And now it's up to you leaders to go out and make something of it and contribute back within your systems. And I'll hand it back over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Giancarlo. And just as we close out, Jeff, you were talking about this idea of, how do we do more of this? And actually when Knowledge Hook approached me to do this leadership series, I was trying to think of, what do senior education leaders really need an opportunity? We need an opportunity to connect more with business leaders, to be able to see that connectivity and have all those things happen that you're talking about. So, and do it in a way that's scalable. I mean, we know that, businesses and not-for-profits, they're busy places, and we have to do it in a way. So one of the things, and just, mentioning to you and mentioning to the people that are on the line right now, that's exactly what we're going to be continuing to do. We're going to have more business leaders here. I'm thinking of my role as when I was the director of education in Ottawa, I would be showing clips of this to, when we had our monthly principal meetings, I'd be showing clips of this to them to be able to say, our business leaders are begging us to do this in schools and they want to partner with us. So it's okay to reach out to them to ask you to do things. So a huge thanks to the three of you, and Giancarlo, you do such a great job of hosting a conversation. I know that I'm going to be sharing this with my colleagues. I'm also going to show it to my 17-year-old and my 22-year-old because, as a mom, I want them to hear. They need to hear. They don't know what you're looking for. And so as a mom, I'm really happy to have been part of this conversation as well. Harris is going to flip up just a couple of closing slides now. And just to give people an opportunity to be able to know that we're going to be continuing on with these. We've got another one happening in a month on December the 9th. And we also, for those of you who want to sign up or to share this link with others, whether it's principals in your systems or other superintendents or ministry or department people, it's knowledgehook.com/leadership. All the resources there are free. You just have to open an account, and you have a variety of different things on the different topics. You heard one of them today, future skills, but you've got a variety of on-demand versions of these roundtables. You've got podcasts, etc. And really look forward to, I'm going to reach out to Jeff and Christine and Debbie to see if there are topics that business leaders think would be important for us as K-12 and post-secondary to be hearing. And similarly, anyone that's on the line, please feel free to connect with me and suggest some topics. We will try to make sure that those happen. Our next session is actually one that's very connected to this idea of leaders' skills. And it's with, it'll be on November the 18th, and it's about leaders connecting and communicating. And it's with Stephen Degroot, who is an incredibly talented Canadian psychologist that does a lot of work with major companies actually on helping them develop programs to help leaders develop the skills of connecting and communicating. So feel free to sign up for that. We'll open up registration in the next couple of days. On behalf of all of the audience, Debbie and Jeff and Christine and Giancarlo, a huge thanks. We know you're super busy, and your words today will help us do a better job in K-12 and post-secondary. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.